In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This verse we've almost all heard at some point in our lives. We've seen depictions of God within our popular media, within movies, within TV shows. But how does this one verse inform us about God and his character and his nature? How do you envision God? If you will, close your eyes with me and let's envision God together. Do you picture a man bearded in the sky? Do you imagine someone who is far away in a distant place, keeping watch from the heavens? Maybe you picture a puppet master that's pulling all the strings of everyone here on earth. A Pew Research study in 2018 gathered that almost 80% of adults in the United States believe in a God or a higher spiritual power. But does God love us unconditionally? Does God love everyone in spite of their faults? Does God know everything? Is God all-powerful? These questions, the 80% of professing individuals could not agree upon. This first verse in the Bible does a lot more to inform us about the nature of God than we give it credit for. If God created the heavens and the earth, then we can't simply leave the answer to this question to our own limited comprehension. But there are a few things that we can gather from logic in reviewing this verse. This verse begins with "in the beginning." This implies that God existed before the beginning, in order to create the beginning. Thus, God's not bound by time in the same way we are. If God created the heavens and the earth, then God is not only not bound by time, but he's not bound by space either. Despite what's depicted in films like Avengers Endgame or Back to the Future, or TV shows like Loki or Quantum Leap, or even novels like The Time Machine, we as humans are limited in our capability to be able to travel through time. We can only travel in time linearly from past to present to future. God's not bound by time the same way we are. God doesn't exist within a linear fashion. He doesn't have to be experiencing time from past to present to future, but he can experience all these things at once by taking a backward step and viewing the entirety of human existence. Furthermore, since God created everything, God isn't bound to anything. He's not material in the same way we are material. He doesn't want for clothes. He doesn't need food. He doesn't grow weary or need rest. This verse also means that God is not bound to a material world in the same way we are bound to a material world, since he created the heavens and the earth. God is not limited to a physical human body the same way we are. He doesn't grow weary or tired. He doesn't grow hungry. He's not in need for food, and he's not in need for sleep. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, we as humans have traveled our fastest in 1969 during the Apollo 10 mission. That would be 39,937.7 kilometers per hour. However, God could exist in both locations at the same time, not leaving time for travel. Since God created the world and the heavens that we know today, it would be logical to say that God doesn't need any of that. In fact, there's nothing within what we can conceive that would be beyond God's power to do. And God doesn't need for anything, but instead he chose to create us. Having made that decision to create us, that shows that God must have a personality. For if somebody wants to create, they have to have ambition to create. And then they have to have a thought and drive to create that thing in which they're wanting to create. That's something that separates us and our creativity and our imagination from the rest of the animal kingdom. And this seems to be something we evidently got from our Creator. However, if God lives outside of this time bubble that we find ourselves in, then God knew about everything that we would do and everything that would go on before He even created us. And yet God, despite the heartache and the pain and the destruction that we cause, God still decided to create us anyways, showing that God loved us and showing that we were the intent of the design that He built out in creation. God created us because He loves us, and God limits Himself for our sake and created us even knowing that we would make all these mistakes and that we would fail Him, but yet He limits Himself so we can choose to accept Him and to follow Him and love Him in return for Him loving us, even though He knew about all the bad things and all the destruction and all the heartache that we would cause before He created us. You see, we often put God into this box so we can better understand Him. Again, we've seen it within movies. We've seen it within TV shows where we've pictured God. We've seen sermons to where people have boiled God down to a certain set of things. We've seen pastors and rabbis and other spiritual leaders put limitations upon God. But God's not limited by our comprehension of God. God limits Himself only through Himself and by His will. May I encourage you to know that there is a God, and that God loves you, and that God created everything in the universe for you. And may I challenge you that when you think of God as this all-powerful being, instead of putting our own limitations upon God. Accept that God has no limitations other than the limitations that He puts upon Himself. Don't try to box in God and benefit for your own understanding. Please continue to follow along with me as we learn more about this loving and caring God that we've talked about today. May God keep you and bless you. Really quick, before you go, let me explain why I felt led to start this channel. When talking to Pilate, Jesus said, "I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate responds by asking, "What is the truth?" It's evident that a lot of people are still asking this question almost 2,000 years later. And while we live in an amazing time with the wealth of the world's knowledge available in the palm of our hands, there's often too much information, leaving people unable to process what's true and what's not true. Paul describes such times in this way when he writes his second letter to his disciple Timothy. Always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. There are several who expound on what truth is, but often they are misguided, or they are malice in their intent, or they're being intellectually dishonest. My hope is that I am able to provide evidence for why the scriptural narrative is true, a contextual and practical explanation of the principles found in its writings, and a defense for other believers. As Peter explains, you should always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. If you find value in this channel as I do, there are a few ways you can help, both by gifting and without spending any money. First, react and interact with these videos wherever you're watching from. This greatly helps the channel be seen by others and new people. Next, please share this content with others you feel may benefit from the information found here. Also, please subscribe to this channel on all social media. And finally, if you feel led to, and if you have the means to, please consider giving to this channel through the outlets previously mentioned, or the channel's Patreon. All these links are going to be in the video description. Thank you for watching, and may God keep you and bless you.